In this video, we're going to be doing some IB questions, specifically paper 1 questions on the topic of cell division. So let's just get into it. Always try these questions by yourself first, because maybe you already know them. So what is the difference between a cell in the G1 phase and a cell in the G2 phase? Okay, so again, here is the cell cycle, and we know the cell cycle has two basic phases: interphase and cell division. Interphase has the G1, S, and G2 phase. And each of these phases, something unique happens, right? So in G1 phase, we have growth. S phase, we have DNA being replicated, right? And then G2 phase, we have basically the same thing as in G1 phase, just continued, okay? So a cell in the G2 phase would be smaller than a cell in G1 phase. This is not true because we know that in G1 phase the cell will grow, which means by the time it gets to G2 phase, it will just grow even more. So it's not possible for a cell in G2 phase to be smaller than a cell in G1 phase. It's impossible. It will be bigger. B, a cell in the G2 phase would have more mitochondria than a cell in G1 phase. Okay, so we know in G1, when a cell enters G1, it doesn't have that many organelles yet, because in G1 it's going to copy some organelles. It's going to make more organelles, duplicate the organelles, right? Because when the cell needs to divide later by mitosis, it needs to have double of everything, so that when the cell divides, each of the daughter cells, each of the baby cells will have all the things it needs. So a cell in G2 phase would have more mitochondria. This is true because in G1 it's going to make more organelles, so by the time it gets to G2 it will have more organelles than they had in G1. Okay, so it must be, answer should be B. But we'll also quickly eliminate why it's not C or D. So a cell in the G1 phase would have more DNA in its chromosomes than a cell in G2 phase. No, because we know in G1 phase it still has the normal amount of chromosomes, because in S phase, when it enters S phase, the DNA is replicated. So G2 phase will have much more DNA than a cell in G1 phase. So this is saying the exact opposite, therefore it cannot be C. Okay, last option. DNA replication occurs in the G1 phase but not in the G2 phase. Nope, it doesn't happen in either of the G phases. It happens in the S phase. Okay, this is where DNA is replicated. Again, if you don't understand what I'm talking about here, I made a whole video on describing everything that you need to know about cell division, okay? So I recommend you check this out. I'm just referring back to it to quickly explain the answers to the questions. Okay, next one. Which of these processes require mitosis? Mitosis. We know mitosis is the division of cells, making more cells, right? Why do we need mitosis? So overall, there are two reasons for why we need mitosis. One, to grow up, to turn from an embryo in your mom's uterus into a full-blown adult, okay? Okay, we need to grow, we can become bigger. We're made of cells, right? So the only way we can get bigger is if we become more cells, right? Or another scenario would be healing. When you get injured, you scrape off your skin. Now this skin needs to grow back, okay? Cells need to divide to make new skin again, okay? So that's the two main purposes of cell division. So, which of these processes require mitosis? A, embryological development. Yes, that's true. That means turning from a baby, growing into an embryo in your mom's uterus, okay? So it's definitely that one. Well, why not B? Reducing surface area to volume ratio. So this I'll talk about in a video in chapter 1.4, I think. But this one is wrong because you're increasing the surface area to volume ratio when you do mitosis. You're not reducing it. But this won't make sense unless you go and watch that video on 1.4. Okay, C, maintaining cell size. No. When you do mitosis, you reduce cell size because you break one cell into two cells, right? So you're not keeping the same cell size. Cell growth, no. Mitosis is not cell growth. We know that cell growth happens in interphase, G1 and G2 phase. Mitosis is simply just division. It's nothing to do with growth. Okay, therefore the answer is A. So let's get to the next one. During reproduction in flowering plants, an embryo sac is produced. Again, an embryo, like I said, is basically the very beginning of a human, or in this case, the very beginning of a flower or a plant. It contains one haploid nucleus. So they're just saying its DNA contains a certain amount of chromosomes. Okay, this certain amount of chromosome divide by mitosis 3 times. Okay, so basically what they're saying is we have this cell. Okay, and the cell is going to divide 3 times. Okay, 3 times. We know mitosis is simply taking the cell and making an exact duplicate of it. Okay, dividing it in 2. So this cell, after 1 division, will become 2 cells. Now the next division, each of these cells will become their own 2 separate cells. So after 2 divisions, we have produced a total of 4 cells. Okay, because 1 cell became 2 cells, and then each of these 2 cells became their own 2 cells. So far we have 4 cells, 4 haploid nuclei. But they're saying we need to divide 3 times. So if we divide 1 more time, we will have a total of 8 cells. Okay, so the answer will be 8 haploid nuclei. Because with mitosis, you don't change the way the DNA is. And we know the DNA here is haploid, where when we duplicate it, the daughter cells will be the exact same. They will also be haploid. Okay, so any answer that has diploid, we ignore immediately, because mitosis doesn't change the DNA. Okay, only meiosis does that. So it's got to be haploid, and we know the answer is 8. So the answer's got to be D. Okay, next one. During which stage of the cell cycle are the numbers of mitochondria increased in a cell? Okay, so coming back, we said during G1 phase, the organelles are increased. Okay, we duplicate the amount of organelles, right? So which one? And G1 phase is in which phase? Interphase. Okay, so they're saying cytokinesis. No, cytokinesis is here. That's during cell division. Then they're saying interphase. Yes, it's got to be B. It's going to be an interphase. During meiosis, nope, meiosis is not even in the cell cycle. It's not even part of the cell cycle. So it cannot be meiosis. Mitosis is, but again, it's the division part. It's in the cell division part. So we know the answer is going to be B. So let's do one more question. During which phase of the cell cycle do chromosomes duplicate? So chromosomes, we know it's just DNA. It's how our DNA is stored. So where's our DNA replicated? In the S phase, okay? S phase, so it's going to be B. The answer is B automatically. So these are some multiple choice questions. I'm going to be making more parts, so part 2, part 3, and so on, just so you can get as much practice as possible. I guarantee you some of these questions will show up on your test, so the more you do, the better.